The Crimson Fund, the architect and the vulnerable magnate. Action required. If you believe that betrayal can lead to destiny, smash that subscribe button right now and enable notifications. This is not just a story. It's a bombshell waiting to explode. The blinding flash of 1,000 cameras illuminated the most scandalous kiss of the decade. There, on the crimson carpet of the grand gala of the Royal Circle in Madrid, stood Damien Thorne, a multi-billion-dollar industry magnate, his lips sealed to those of an actress half his age. The world's media held its breath, capturing the brazen betrayal in high definition. This was not just an affair, it was a public declaration of war against his marriage. But the real story wasn't the shocking infidelity of the billionaire. It was what happened 60 seconds later, as murmurs of astonishment rippled through the crowd. A single Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled to a stop. The door opened, and the true Mrs. Thorne emerged. And she was not crying. She had come to collect. Drop a like if you think revenge is a dish best served cold. Tell us your first impression of this shocking start in the comments below. Part 1. The architect's design. The atmosphere in the Salamanca district penthouse was always the same. Rarefied, cold, and with a faint scent of orange blossom and sterilized money. It was an ambiance that Eleanor Vance had curated, just as she had curated every other aspect of their lives. From the Joaquin Sorolla canvas hanging opposite a bold Miquel Barceló, a deliberately provocative combination she chose to unnerve the stuffiest investors, to the precise temperature of the wine in the cellar. Everything was a testament to her meticulous control. Everything, it seemed, except her husband. Damien Thorne moved through their shared space like a conquering king, surveying territory that had long bored him. He was a man built by headlines and leveraged buyouts. His charisma, a weapon he wielded with casual cruelty. Tonight, he was a storm of expensive cologne and restless energy, pulling on a Tom Ford tuxedo jacket that cost more than the average person's car. "Aren't you ready?" he asked, not looking at her. His eyes were fixed on his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window, which framed a sparkling and submissive Madrid. Eleanor sat at her vanity, a point of stillness in his whirlwind. She wore a simple silk robe, her back to him. Her own reflection showed a woman of unnerving composure, her features sharp and intelligent, her eyes the color of a stormy sea. For 15 years, she had been the silent architect of his empire. He was the face, the booming voice on earnings calls, the ruthless negotiator. The papers loved to call the vulture, but she was the strategist, the one who saw the chessboard from above, who understood that true power lay not in loud pronouncements, but in quiet, invisible moves. "The invitation says 8, she replied, her voice calm and even. She picked up a diamond earring, a massive pear-cut Cartier stone, a gift from their 10th anniversary, an offering of guilt she knew even then, for an affair he thought she would never discover. She had discovered them all. "I'm heading out early. I have to greet the board members for the Barcelona subsidiary acquisition," he said, adjusting his bow tie. It was a lie, a clumsy one. The Barcelona deal had closed last week, and the board members were already home. He was going to meet Sofia Diaz, a name as manufactured as her talent. Eleanor had the complete dossier on her desk in her private study. Born Carmen Rojas in a forgotten town in Extremadura, she had come to the capital with dreams bigger than her investment portfolio. Now she was Damien's latest and most public indulgence. "Of course," Eleanor said, her voice betraying nothing. "Don't let me hold you up." He paused at the door. A flicker of something, annoyance, surprise crossed his face. He had expected a fight, or tears, or at least a hurtful question. The lack of it seemed to disconcert him more than any accusation. For a moment, He looked at the woman at the vanity, this strange, beautiful, placid woman he had married, and felt a prickle of unease. He had always mistaken her silence for submission. It was a fatal miscalculation. "The car will be back for you in 30 minutes, he stated, his tone clipped, reaffirming his control. "Try to look happy, Eleanor. It's a big night for the Thorne Foundation." The door closed with a click, leaving a profound silence in its wake. Eleanor stared at her reflection for a full minute. Slowly, she placed the diamond earring back in its velvet box. It was a relic of a past she was about to incinerate. She reached for another set. Emeralds. Green as poison. Green as money. Green as the envy she was about to inspire. Her phone buzzed on the marble vanity. A single text from her private investigator, a discreet ghost named Arturo Solis. He picked her up. "They are 10 minutes from the circle." Eleanor's fingers danced over the screen, her reply swift and unemotional. "The board is ready. The proxies are signed. His arrogance is the trigger, Arturo. Let him pull it." She stood up, the silk robe pooling at her feet. What awaited her was not a dress, but armor. A custom-made Schiaparelli gown in a shocking, visceral crimson. It was the color of blood, the color of power, the color of a warning. Tonight was not a benefit gala for the Thorne Foundation. It was a coronation. Her coronation. And Damien had just sent out the invitations. She had been patient for years, collecting threads, documenting indiscretions, creating shell corporations, and moving assets with the silent precision of a master weaver. She hadn't just built a safety net for herself. She had woven a cage for him, gilded with his own greed and lined with his betrayals. He thought he was walking onto a red carpet. In reality, he was walking onto a battlefield she had designed, and he had just lit the fuse for his own immolation. Part 2. The public execution, the crimson carpet at the grand gala of the Royal Circle, was a river of flashes and manufactured smiles. It was the apex of Madrid society, a place where power and fame mingled under the unforgiving eye of the media. Reporters from Vogue, Vanity Fair, and major news networks flanked the velvet ropes, their lenses like the hungry eyes of wolves, seeking a story, a scandal, a single moment of imperfection. Tonight, they were about to feast. Damien Thorne's Bentley Mulsanne arrived with the discreet arrogance befitting his status. The crowd stirred, cameras flared, reporters shouting his name. He exited first, a vision of bespoke power, but it was the woman who followed him that caused the first wave of astonishment. It was not Eleanor. Sofia Diaz was sheathed in a silver dress that left little to the imagination. She was undeniably beautiful, with the hungry, sharp beauty of a woman who knew it was her only currency. She clung to Damien's arm, her smile a mix of triumph and terror. She was playing a dangerous game, and for the first time, she was playing it on the world stage. They posed. Damien, smug and possessive, his hand dangerously low on her back. Sofia, preening, tilting her head a certain way, a movie star in her own grand drama. The questions came like machine gun fire. "Mr. Thorne, a bold statement tonight." "Sofia, are you the new face of the foundation?" "Where is Mrs. Thorne?" Damien merely smiled, a predator's smile. He was reveling in this, in the sheer audacity. He was Damien Thorne. The rules that governed lesser men, rules of decorum, of fidelity, of simple decency, did not apply to him. He was about to prove it. He leaned into Sofia, his voice a low murmur meant only for her, but watched by millions. "They want a show? Let's give them one." And then he did it. He dipped her, a parody of old Hollywood romance, and kissed her. It was no simple peck on the cheek. It was a deep, passionate, deliberately provocative kiss. Right there, under the searing glare of the cameras. For a moment there was stunned silence. The frantic clicking of the cameras was the only sound. Then, a collective, audible gasp swept through the press corps and the assembled socialites. This went beyond a mere affair. It was a public execution of a marriage. It was a declaration that Eleanor Vance, the elegant, enigmatic woman who had stood by his side for 15 years, had been officially replaced. Discarded, humiliated on a global scale. Sophia caught her breath, her eyes wide, her cheeks flushed. This was the moment she had dreamed of. She had won. She was no longer a secret, a mistress hidden in a suite. She was here, on the arm of a billionaire, being kissed on the world's most exclusive red carpet. She felt a potent wave of victory. She mistook the flashes for starlight, the reporter's shock for admiration. Damien straightened his jacket, a smug smile etched on his lips. He looked directly into the lens of a nearby television camera, as if sending a message straight to his wife, wherever she was, likely crying in their cavernous penthouse. "This is my world, my rules," his eyes said. "No more questions," he announced, his voice booming with authority. He began to guide Sophia up the grand steps of the museum, leaving a firestorm in his wake. The gossip was already spreading like wildfire, phones lighting up across the city, across the world. The king had publicly crowned his new queen, but the story was not over. In fact, it had barely begun. Part 3. The Queen's Arrival. As Damien and Sophia reached the top of the stairs, a new commotion started at the curb. It was a different kind of stir, not the feverish frenzy of a scandal, but a wave of hushed, reverent astonishment. An even more imposing black Rolls-Royce Phantom than Damien's Bentley had glided to a silent halt. The license plate was simple, EV1. Eleanor Vance. A single doorman, as if saluting royalty, rushed to open the rear door. For a moment nothing happened. The anticipation was electric. The reporters, sensing a second act, swung their cameras away from Damien and toward the car. Then a single leg emerged, encased in a crimson silk stiletto. It was followed by the rest of her. Eleanor Vance. When Eleanor Vance stepped out of the Rolls-Royce, the world seemed to slow on its axis. The chaotic symphony of the red carpet, the shouting, the flashing lights, the desperate scramble for a story, dulled into a stunned, reverent silence. She did not look like a woman who had just been publicly humiliated. She looked like a woman who had come to burn an empire to the ground and dance among its ashes. Her dress was a masterpiece of defiance. The Schiaparelli crimson was so vivid it seemed to bleed into the red carpet itself, a perfect extension of her power. The cut was architectural, severe, with sharp shoulders that spoke of battle armor, and a neckline that plunged with brazen confidence. Around her neck was not a delicate pearl necklace, but a stunning Bulgari Serpenti necklace of emeralds and black diamonds, a coiled snake around her throat, its head resting near her heart. It was a statement. She was not the victim. She was the viper. Her face was serene. Her expression, a mask of cold, impenetrable calm. Her hair was pulled back into a severe bun, emphasizing the sharp, intelligent lines of her face. There were no traces of tears, no redness in her eyes. Her gaze swept over the stunned press corps, not with fear or shame, but with an almost compassionate authority. It was the look of a queen inspecting a crowd of court jesters. She did not hurry. She did not falter. She began to walk alone along the carpet, her posture perfect, every movement deliberate and imbued with a grace that was almost terrifying in its control. The cameras, which had been machine guns moments before, were now like the slow pans of a cinematic masterpiece. They were no longer trying to capture a scandal. They were trying to capture an icon. At the top of the stairs, Damien had stopped, frozen. He turned, his face a mask of disbelief. He had expected her to stay home, to crumble, to call him screaming. He had not expected this magnificent public defiance. Beside him, Sophia's triumphant smile had evaporated, replaced by a look of utter panic. The silver dress that had looked so glamorous now looked cheap and desperate next to Eleanor's crimson armor. The movie star suddenly looked exactly what she was, a stand-in, a cheap imitation who had been caught playing dress-up in the Queen's castle. Eleanor reached the middle of the carpet and paused. She turned not toward her husband, but toward the most prominent camera, the one broadcasting live to millions. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. It was not warm. It was a promise, a threat. In that single, silent moment, she commanded the entire narrative. The story was no longer billionaire cheats on wife. It was Eleanor Vance has arrived. Eleanor. She resumed her walk. As she neared the stairs, the reporters found their voices, but the questions were different now. Mrs. Thorne, you look stunning. Eleanor, what are you wearing? An incredible statement tonight, Mrs. Thorne. She ignored them all, her eyes fixed on a point just above Damien's head. She ascended the stairs, every step a hammer blow against the foundations of his world. When she reached the landing, she was finally face to face with her husband and his mistress. The air crackled. The three stood there, a tableau of betrayal and retribution for what felt like an eternity. Damien's face was a mixture of fury and confusion. This was not his script. She had torn up the pages and rewritten the play with herself as the protagonist. Sophia, completely out of her depth, tried to assert her position, tightening her grip on Damien's arm, a pathetic gesture of possession that only highlighted her insecurity. Eleanor's gaze finally fell upon them. She looked at Sophia first. Her eyes swept over the younger woman from head to toe, with an expression of profound indifference, as if observing a piece of furniture that had been delivered to the wrong address. She offered no anger, no jealousy, only a scorn so complete it was more insulting than any insult. Then she looked at her husband. She did not raise her voice. She did not make a scene. She simply leaned in close, her voice a silky whisper only he could hear, though the world watched, trying to decipher its meaning. "Enjoy your evening, Damien," she murmured, her breath cool against his ear. "It is the last one you will have as the man you think you are." Without waiting for a response, she straightened. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to the museum director waiting at the doorway, and swept past them into the gala. She did not look back. She left Damien Thorne standing on the steps, his mistress on his arm, suddenly looking not like a king with his prize, but like a fool who had just been checkmated in front of the entire world. The reporters gasped, no longer because of the kiss, but because of the sheer, unaltered power of the woman who had just owned the entire event. Part 4. The market correction. The interior of the Royal Circle Gala had transformed into a shimmering forest of crystal and starlight. The air hummed with the conversation of the global 1%, a murmur of money and power set to the music of a string quartet. But tonight, there was only one topic of conversation. The drama that had unfolded on the steps had followed them inside, clinging to the atmosphere like expensive perfume on the guests' wrists. Eleanor moved through the gala, not like a pariah, but like a conquering general. Heads turned as she passed. Conversation stopped. The initial whispers of pity for the poor cheated wife had been utterly silenced by her arrival. They were replaced by whispers of awe, of fear, of intense speculation. A woman who could face that level of public betrayal with such regal composure was not a woman to be trifled with. Damien and Sophia entered moments later, the mood shifting around them like iron filings to a magnet. Damien, accustomed to being the center of admiring attention, found himself subject to furtive, judging glances. His allies in the industry, men who would normally have rushed to shake his hand, suddenly found their champagne glasses fascinating. The women, the wives of his peers, glared at Sophia with thinly veiled disdain before turning away to give Eleanor subtle nods of approval. In this world's unspoken social calculus, Damien had made a fatal error. He had been vulgar. His transgression wasn't the affair itself, but the crude, public nature of it. He had created a spectacle, and in doing so, he had displayed a profound lack of class. Eleanor, meanwhile, was holding court. She addressed a group of the city's most powerful figures: Hector Cisneros, the grizzled chairman of a rival investment bank; Doña Elena de la Vega, the old matriarch of a fashion dynasty and the gala's chief benefactress; and Judge Figueroa, a federal judge whose influence was felt from finance to government. "Eleanor, darling," Doña Elena said, her voice like gravel and diamonds, taking Eleanor's hands in hers. "Schiaparelli, a choice for a woman who has something to say without speaking." Eleanor smiled warmly, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I thought tonight required a little color, Elena." Hector Cisneros, a man who had been Damien's business rival for 2 decades, raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Thorne is making a spectacle of himself. Are you all right, Eleanor?" Momento de interacción. Interaction point. What do you think Eleanor should answer to pivot the scandal into a business strategy? A. Cry and blame the mistress. B. Play it down as a mere slip-up by Damien. C. Frame it as a business divergence. Eleanor chose C. This was the moment. The test. Her answer would set the tone for the rest of their lives. She took a sip of champagne, her eyes glinting over the rim of the crystal glass. "Damien has always had a flair for the dramatic," she said, her tone light, almost amused. "He is launching a new venture. I felt it was best he managed his own publicity for it." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. This was not a marriage collapse. It was a business divergence. By framing it this way, she was not the scorned wife. She was a CEO announcing a separation of assets. The nuance was not lost on them. Cisneros's eyes sharpened with interest. This was the language he understood. Not emotion, but strategy. Meanwhile, Damien tried to regain control. He dragged Sophia toward a group of his board members, a forced smile plastered to his face. "Gentlemen, a wonderful night." The men, mostly in their 60s, looked from Damien to the half-dressed movie star on his arm, and then across the room to the vision of elegance that was his wife, now laughing with a federal judge. They exchanged uneasy glances. "Damien," said one, a conservative named Roberto Milan. "Quite an entrance." "Needed to shake things up," Damien blustered, slapping him on the back. But the bravado sounded hollow. He was losing the room, and he knew it. Sophia, sensing the chill, shrank back. The fantasy was turning into a nightmare. She had imagined being welcomed into this world, lauded and admired. Instead, she was looked at like an invasive species. Eleanor's mind was a whirlwind of calculation, but on the surface, she was the epitome of grace. She remembered a night, 6 months earlier, that had sealed Damien's fate. She had come home early from a charity board meeting, the quiet hum of the private elevator opening directly into their penthouse. She heard them. Laughter from the master bedroom. Their bedroom. Sophia's thin, theatrical giggle, and Damien's deeper, indulgent laugh. She didn't storm in. She retreated as silently as she came, rode the elevator back down, and walked for hours through the Retiro Park in the falling darkness. The pain was a cold, sharp thing, but it was quickly superseded by a crystalline clarity. The marriage was not a partnership to be salvaged. It was a hostile entity from which she needed to extract herself and her assets. For years, she had channeled her brilliance into his company. Her strategies had earned them billions. Her name wasn't on the door of Grupo Montesinos, but her fingerprints were on every successful plan. That night, she had called Genoveva Duran, a divorce attorney known less for court theatrics and more for her reputation as a corporate assassin in couture. Their first meeting wasn't about alimony or asset division. It was about a hostile takeover. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad, Damien used to boast. Clause 12, subsection B, Eleanor had calmly countered, the reputational damage clause. I had it drafted. It states that any act of public degradation or humiliation that negatively impacts Grupo Montesinos' share value voids the financial caps of the agreement. Genoveva's perfectly sculpted eyebrows had raised. And how would you prove a direct link between public humiliation and share value? By making sure they happen at the same time, Eleanor had said. Damien is arrogant. He thinks he is untouchable. He is about to make a very big, very public mistake, and when he does, we will be ready to burn him to the ground. Now, standing in the Grand Museum Hall, surrounded by the powerful, Eleanor felt the last vestiges of the wounded wife fade, entirely replaced by the cold, exhilarating certainty of the CEO. The party was not the end game. It was a PR move, a brilliant one. She was establishing her narrative, presenting herself as the victor before the battle had officially begun. Damien thought he was playing checkers. She had been playing multi-dimensional chess for years, and her queen was about to take his king. Part 5. The Crimson Coup. As the gala continued its charade of civility, a different drama unfolded in the quiet, illuminated canyons of the financial district. This was Eleanor's true battlefield, a realm of algorithms and stock tickers, where fortunes were won and lost in nanoseconds. Precisely at 21:47, just as the first course was being served at the gala, an alert flashed across the desks of every major financial journalist in the country. It was a regulatory filing, sent through a labyrinthine series of shell corporations based in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands, all perfectly legal, all masterfully orchestrated by Genoveva Duran's forensic accounting team. The filing announced that a previously unknown investment consortium, the Crimson Fund, had acquired a 15% stake in Grupo Montesinos. The shares had been discreetly purchased in small, untraceable blocks over the past 6 months. But that wasn't the bomb. The bomb was the Crimson Fund's declared intent to initiate a vote of no confidence against the CEO, Damien Thorne, citing erratic, reputationally damaging behavior that poses a material risk to shareholder value. Simultaneously, an anonymous and devastatingly detailed report was leaked to El Economista. It detailed a pattern of corporate malfeasance by Damien, using the company jet for personal rendezvous, awarding a lucrative marketing contract to a firm with deep ties to Sofia Diaz, and diverting foundation money to vanity projects. Every claim was backed by scanned receipts, flight manifests, and internal emails. The source was untraceable, but the information was impeccable. It was the complete dossier Arturo Solis had compiled over a year of painstaking work. Back at the gala, Damien's phone began vibrating incessantly. He ignored it at first, trying to focus on charming a potential investor. But then his CFO's face flashed on the screen with a look of pure panic in his eyes. Damien excused himself, his irritation palpable. He walked to a discreet alcove, the festive music a mocking counterpoint to the storm about to break. "What is it, David?" he snapped. "It better be important." "Damien, have you seen the news?" David's voice was strained. "El Economista just broke a story. It's bad, and there's a regulatory filing. A group called the Crimson Fund is making a move. They're questioning your character, demanding a vote." Damien felt a chill run through his bones, a sensation so alien he barely recognized it. The Crimson Fund? I've never heard of them. Who the hell are they? We don't know. They're a ghost. But they own the shares, Damien. And the timing? God, the timing with what you did on the red carpet. The board is going insane. The Asian markets open in a few hours. The stock is going to be massacred. Damien's mind raced. This was a coordinated attack. Sophisticated. Brutal. Not random. His eyes swept the crowded room, searching, and then they settled on her. Eleanor was standing by the grand display case of the Charles III bust, talking to Hector Cisneros. She looked at him, her expression unreadable, and then she raised her champagne flute in a silent, mocking toast. Crimson, the color of her dress. The blood drained from his face. It was her. It had to be her. But how? She didn't have that kind of capital, that kind of cunning. He had always seen her as an accessory, a beautiful, intelligent fixture in his life, but ultimately, a dependent. The idea that she could orchestrate a corporate raid of this magnitude was unthinkable. He started walking towards her, pushing people aside, his mask of charm ripped away to reveal the raw fury beneath. Sophia, seeing him charge across the room, tried to follow, calling his name. But now she was just part of the wake of his destruction. He cornered Eleanor against the cold stone of the ancient bust display. "You," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "This is you, the Crimson Fund. How did you do this?" Eleanor did not flinch. She took one final, delicate sip of her champagne and placed the empty glass on a passing waiter's tray. She looked him dead in the eyes, her gaze as cold and hard as the emeralds at her throat. "You are mistaken, Damien." Her voice was dangerously quiet. "I didn't do this. You did. You simply weren't paying attention. The money, Eleanor. Where did you get the money for the shares?" he demanded, gripping her arm. Hector Cisneros stepped forward. "Thorne, I suggest you take your hands off her." Damien barely registered him. His world was tilting, the floor giving way beneath him. Eleanor looked at his hand on her arm with distaste, and then back at his face. "For 15 years, every investment strategy, every market prediction, every successful acquisition of Grupo Montesinos came from my research, my analysis. While you took the credit, I was collecting a commission, a very small, legally stipulated consulting fee that was channeled into a private trust, a clause you were too arrogant to ever read in the mountain of paperwork I prepared for you." She pulled her arm free. "I didn't buy your company with your money, darling. I bought it with my salary. And now," she added, a chilling smile gracing her lips, "thanks to your little performance tonight, Clause 12. Subsection B of our prenuptial agreement has been activated. The reputational damage clause. The cap on my divorce settlement is now gone. Your personal fortune is next." It was the invisible blade, not a weapon of passion, but a scalpel of pure, cold logic, wielded with a surgeon's precision. He had been so preoccupied with his public betrayal that he had completely missed the private execution that had been taking place for years, right under his nose. He had thought he was the vulture, but he had been the carcass all along, and she had just started to feast. Part 7. Checkmate. The consequences were immediate and catastrophic. When the sun rose over Madrid, the name Damien Thorne was no longer synonymous with power, but with scandal and spectacular collapse. The Asian markets opened first, and it was a bloodbath. Grupo Montesinos' stock plunged 40% in the first hour of trading. The damning El Economista article had gone global, and investors were in a panic. His public affairs story was now just a colorful footnote to the real narrative. A CEO whose recklessness and poor judgment had made the company vulnerable to a hostile takeover. His public kiss had not only humiliated his wife, It had cost his shareholders billions. Damien spent the night in his office, a modern prison of glass and steel overlooking the city that no longer felt like his kingdom. He was a caged animal, roaring down the phone at lawyers, bankers, and board members, but their voices were distant, cautious. The loyalty he had commanded through fear and wealth was evaporating. He was no longer a winner, and in his world, there was no room for losers. He tried to fight back. He issued a press release denying the accusations, calling them a baseless attack by a shadowy corporate raider. But it was futile. The evidence was too specific, too damning. The public, fed by the delicious gala drama, had already chosen him as the villain. News channels replayed the kiss clip, followed by the footage of Eleanor's magnificent arrival, creating a perfect, irresistible narrative of a fallen king and a rising queen. Sofia Diaz became a casualty of war. Her agent dropped her. The lucrative marketing contract was canceled. She was hounded by paparazzi but no longer treated as a rising star. She was treated as a homewrecker, a punchline. She called Damien repeatedly, but her calls went straight to voicemail. He had used her as a prop in his own downfall, and now she was discarded. Her 15 minutes of fame had been a public immolation. The final blow came 3 days after the gala. An emergency board meeting was called. Damien walked into the boardroom, the long mahogany table filled with somber-faced men who had once fawned over him. At the head of the table, in his chair, sat Hector Cisneros, and via a large video screen, connected from her lawyer's office, was Eleanor. She wore a white pantsuit, her expression neutral. "What is the meaning of this, Hector?" Damien demanded, his voice hoarse. "It's simple, Damien," Cisneros said, his tone devoid of sympathy. "The Crimson Fund, in partnership with my bank and several other key institutional investors, now controls a 51% voting bloc. We are exercising our rights. The board has voted. You are out, effective immediately." "You can't do this!" Damien roared, his face purple with rage. "It is already done." Eleanor's voice cut through the chaos, calm and clear from the monitor. "Your personal assets are frozen, pending our divorce settlement. The corporate jet has been claimed. Your corporate accounts are sealed. You will be escorted out of the building by security. You are no longer CEO, chairman, or board president. You are, to all intents and purposes, a private citizen with a great many legal problems." He stared at her image on the screen, this woman he had so profoundly underestimated. He saw no triumph in her eyes, no gloating, only the dispassionate finality of a business transaction. He had become a liability, and she had liquidated him. "Why, Eleanor?" he asked, his voice finally breaking, the rage giving way to a raw, bewildered desperation. "After all these years, why?" She was silent for a moment, and for the first time, a flicker of something personal crossed her features. It wasn't hate. It was a distant, almost academic pity. "You built this prison yourself, Damien," she said softly. "You simply never saw the bars. You demanded loyalty, but offered none. You craved admiration, but respected no one. You saw my love as a commodity, and my intelligence as a tool for your own enrichment. This is not vengeance. It is a market correction." Security guards walked into the room. They were polite, but firm. As they escorted a stunned and broken Damien Thorne out of the boardroom he had built, he passed the large portrait of himself that hung in the hallway, commissioned after his first billion-dollar year. It depicted him as a titan, a master of the universe. It was the man he thought he was. But as he looked at Eleanor's image on the screen, her face calm and in control, he finally understood the truth. He had never been the titan. He had only been her flashy, disposable figurehead. The real power, the silent, patient, utterly ruthless force, had been by his side all along. Time. And he had been too blind to see it, until it was far, far too late. Part 8. The Aftermath and the Solitude of Power. 6 months later, the name Grupo Montesinos was gone, erased from the glass and steel monolith in the heart of Madrid. In its place, etched in elegant, formidable letters, was a new name: Crimson. The transition had been swift and brutal. Eleanor, acting as the chief shareholder of the new controlling interest, did not take the CEO title herself. That would have been too predictable, too much like Damien's own vanity. Instead, she had installed a respected industry veteran to handle day-to-day operations while she assumed the role of executive chairwoman of the board. Her power was absolute, but it was quiet, strategic, just as she had always been. The press, which had been obsessed with the salacious details of the divorce, quickly shifted its focus. They were now fascinated by the brilliant, enigmatic woman who had outplayed one of the most feared men on the Madrid Stock Exchange. Forbes ran a cover story titled, "The Architect: How Eleanor Vance Built and Reclaimed Her Empire." She had reverted to her maiden name, a name now synonymous with ancient financial acumen, severing the last link to her former life. Her first act as chairwoman was to clean house. She dismantled Damien's network of cronies, purged the toxic, high-pressure culture he had fostered, and implemented policies focused on sustainable long-term growth rather than his slash-and-burn tactics. She reinvested in R&D, established a genuine philanthropic foundation that did more than just host parties, and promoted several brilliant women within the company whom Damien had consistently overlooked. The company not only survived, but thrived. The stock, now trading under the ticker CM7, rebounded and climbed to heights it had never reached under Damien's chaotic leadership. Damien Thorne, meanwhile, had faded into ignominy. The divorce had been devastating. With the prenuptial agreement voided, Eleanor's legal team, led by the formidable Genoveva Duran, had systematically dismantled his personal fortune, proving much of it was inextricably linked to corporate assets he had misused. He was left with a fraction of his wealth, enough to live comfortably, but not enough to ever wield power again. He sold the penthouse and the Soto Grande estate. He was occasionally seen in Europe, looking older, grayer, a ghost at the tables he had once commanded. As for Sofia Diaz, she had vanished entirely from the public sphere. Rumor had it she had returned to Extremadura, her dreams of fame reduced to a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. One crisp autumn afternoon, Eleanor stood in her new office, which occupied the same top-floor space as Damien's. She had completely redecorated. The dark, masculine mahogany and leather were gone, replaced by light woods, modern art, this time by female artists, and a sense of clean, uncluttered space. Damien's massive, ego-driven portrait was gone, replaced by a vast abstract canvas of swirling crimson and gold. She looked out the window at the city spread before her. It was the same view Damien had gazed upon, but she saw something different. He had seen a kingdom to conquer, a reflection of his own ego. She saw a complex, interconnected system, a web of possibilities, a chessboard awaiting her next move. Her assistant's voice came over the intercom. "Madam Chairwoman, the Singapore Solar Tech Firm Board is on the line. They are ready to discuss your acquisition offer." A small smile touched Eleanor's lips. This was her next move, a pivot towards green energy, a field Damien had always dismissed as sentimental nonsense. It was a move toward the future, not the past. "Connect them, please," she said, her voice calm, assured, and utterly in control. She sat at her desk, not the oversized throne Damien had used, but an elegant, functional design piece. She picked up the phone, her emerald and diamond serpent ring gleaming in the afternoon light. She hadn't destroyed Damien's world out of simple revenge. She had done it to build her own. The red carpet had not been an end. It had been a birth, the fiery public birth of an empress, forged in betrayal, crowned in defiance, and now ready to rule. The meaningful yet open conclusion: a year is a lifetime in a city that never sleeps. For Eleanor Santa Cruz, her chosen business name, the last 12 months had been a period of relentless, disciplined rebuilding. The name Damien Thorne was now a historical footnote, a case study taught in business schools on the perils of hubris. Crimson, under her tutelage, had become a giant of innovation and ethical capitalism, a sharp rebuke to the corporate raid culture of the past. Her public image was impeccable, a phoenix, an industry titan, a feminist icon celebrated on magazine covers and revered in boardrooms. She had won. The victory was total, absolute, and undeniable. And yet, there were moments, often in the deep stillness of the night, when she would stand in her new penthouse, a minimalist architectural marvel overlooking the Retiro, all clean lines and cold marble, and feel the profound silence. It was a different silence than the one she had shared with Damien. That one had been thick with unspoken resentments and impending betrayals. This was a new kind of quiet, the silence of the summit. The air was thin up there, and she was complete, yet utterly alone. One Tuesday afternoon, as the autumn light cast long shadows across her sprawling office, the past sent a messenger. Her executive assistant, a fiercely competent young woman, called her on the intercom, her voice tinged with unusual uncertainty. "Madam Chairwoman," she began, "I apologize for the interruption. There is a woman in the lobby. She doesn't have an appointment, but she refuses to leave. She says she will wait all day, if necessary." She gave the name Carmen Rojas. Eleanor froze, her fingers hovering over a tablet displaying quarterly projections. Carmen Rojas, the real name, the Extremadura name. A ghost in a cheap dress, rattling the chains of a life Eleanor had meticulously demolished. Her first instinct was a cold, swift denial. Have security remove her? It was the efficient, logical move, a loose end from a previous business transaction, now irrelevant. But she didn't say it. A sliver of something she couldn't immediately name, perhaps curiosity, or the strategist's innate aversion to an unresolved variable, stopped her. What could this woman possibly want? The money was gone. The man was gone. The life she had coveted was a pile of ashes. "Send her up, Clara," Eleanor said, her voice betraying none of the sudden turbulence in her mind. "Ensure we are not disturbed for the next 30 minutes. A few moments later, the heavy oak door of her office swung open. The woman who walked in was almost unrecognizable. The defiant blonde hair was now a natural brown, cut in a simple, unstyled bob. The predatory ambition in her eyes had been replaced by a deep, weary exhaustion. She wore a plain gray coat and jeans. The last time Eleanor had seen her, she had been dripping borrowed diamonds in desperation on a billionaire's arm. Now, she simply looked like a woman who had had a long, hard fall back to earth. "Mrs. Thorne, Miss Santa Cruz," Sophia corrected herself, her voice quiet, tentative. "Thank you for seeing me." Eleanor remained seated behind her immense desk, a slab of polished obsidian that served as both workspace and barrier. She gestured to one of the chairs opposite her. "Please, sit." Sophia sat on the edge of the chair, looking small and out of place amidst the high ceilings and priceless art. She didn't look at Eleanor, but at her own hands, twisting them in her lap. "I'm sure you wonder why I'm here," Sophia began. "I don't want money. I know there's none to be had. Not from you, not from him. I needed to ask you something. Eleanor waited, her face a mask of polite neutrality. She would not offer an inch of emotion. This was a business meeting. Sophia finally looked up, and her eyes were surprisingly clear. The terror and triumph of that gala night were gone. What was left was a raw, painful sobriety. "He told me he loved me," she said, the words simple, unadorned. "He told me you were just a business partner, an arrangement, that you hadn't shared a bed in years. He said your marriage was a loveless cage, and he was desperate to get out. He promised me everything, a career, a future, a family." She let out a short, bitter laugh. "I was so stupid, I know that now. I was a cliché from a bad movie. But I believed him. I believed him because I wanted to. When he kissed me on that carpet for a second, I thought I had won. I thought my real life was beginning." A flicker of an old memory pierced Eleanor's fortress of composure. Damien, years ago, telling her the same things about his first wife when he had been courting her. The same script, the same promises. He was not a monster of invention. He was a repeating machine, finding a new gear to grind down each new person he consumed. "What is your point, Miss Rojas?" Eleanor's voice was clinical. "My point," Sophia said, leaning forward slightly, her gaze intensifying, "is that I was a weapon. He was using me to hurt you. But you were using me too, weren't you? My dossier, your investigator. You knew he would bring me to the gala. You knew I would do something stupid in public. You wanted me to. That kiss wasn't just his betrayal of you. It was the trigger for your trap. I was the bullet in your gun." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and precise. Eleanor did not deny it. It was, after all, the truth. "You made the choice to be with a married man," Eleanor stated, her tone clinical. "Choices have consequences. I know that." Sophia's voice rose, cracking with a year of pent-up anguish. "And I'm living with them. My name is poison. My face is a meme for homewreckers. I had to move back to Extremadura and work in a diner to help my parents pay the legal fees from the lawsuits his stupid contract dragged me into. I own my decisions. But you sit here in your palace in the sky and pretend this was all just a clean market correction. But it wasn't, was it? It was personal. He broke your heart, and you broke his world, and mine with it." For the first time, Eleanor felt a genuine crack in her armor. She had thought of Sophia as an obstacle, a variable, a tool. She had never truly considered the human cost to the woman who had been the public face of the scandal. She had dehumanized her rival as effectively as Damien had. Sophia seemed to sense the shift. She sat back, her brief burst of anger exhausted, leaving only weariness. Her next words were not an accusation, but a raw, soul-aching question. "I have to know." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Was it worth it? All of this?" She gestured vaguely at the opulent office, the city skyline, the empire at Eleanor's feet. "Did it fix what he broke in you? Are you happy now?" The question pierced Eleanor with unexpected force. It was so simple, yet no one had dared to ask it in a year. They asked about her projections, her strategies, her acquisitions. They did not ask about her heart. She looked past Sophia, out the vast window at the panorama of her victory. She had power, respect, freedom, and more wealth than she could ever spend. She had exacted vengeance with a brilliance that would be talked about for generations. She had everything she had fought for. But happy? Happiness was a warmth, a connection, a quiet sense of peace. Her life was a marvel of engineering, a perfectly functional, climate-controlled machine. It was not warm. Her connections were transactional. And peace? Peace was a distant shore she hadn't yet reached. The vigilance never ended. The memory of the betrayal, though avenged, had left a permanent shard of ice in her soul. She had won the war, but she had become a creature of it, forever scanning the horizon for the next threat. Finally, she turned her gaze back to Carmen Rojas, Sofia Diaz, to the other woman he had broken. She saw not a rival, but a reflection in a warped mirror. A younger, more naive version of a woman who had once also believed the promises of Damien Thorne. "No," Eleanor said. The single word cost her more than any multi-million-dollar deal. Her voice was quiet, stripped of its usual authority, leaving only a raw honesty. "It is not a cure for the wound. Victory is in survival, Miss Rojas, not in the spoils." She stood up and walked to a smaller, personal desk in the corner of the room. She wrote something on a sheet of her personal stationery, folded it, and slid it into an envelope. She returned and handed it to Sofia. "This is the name of a woman who runs a non-profit organization in Seville that helps women start new businesses. There is also a cashier's check that will cover your parents' legal fees and your relocation. It is not an apology. It is, as you said, a consequence. You were collateral damage in a war you did not understand. I am correcting the balance." Sofia stared at the envelope, her eyes filling with tears for the first time. "Why? Because my empire is built on sound principles," Eleanor said, her voice regaining a fraction of its cold mastery. "And I do not tolerate loose ends or unbalanced ledgers. Your association with Damien Thorne is over. Your association with me has now concluded. What you do next is entirely up to you." Sofia stood up, clutching the envelope, and for a moment the two women simply looked at each other across the vast expanse of the office. They were not friends, not enemies, not rivals. They were two survivors of the same shipwreck, standing on opposite shores. After Sofia left, Eleanor walked to the window. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with fiery strokes of crimson and gold, the colors of her brand, of her victory paint. But for the first time, the colors did not feel like triumph. They felt like a warning, an echo. She had built a fortress to protect herself from being hurt again, but now she was its lonely prisoner. She had mastered the world of finance, of strategy, of power, but the quiet, unexplored territory of her own heart remained a wilderness. The battle was won, but she was beginning to understand that the pursuit of peace was a war fought entirely on her own. And so, the reign of Damien Thorne ended, not with a bang, but with the quiet, decisive click of a boardroom door. Eleanor Vance proved that the most powerful move is not always the loudest. Sometimes, it is the one no one sees coming until it is far too late. She didn't just survive a public humiliation, she weaponized it, transforming a moment of profound betrayal into the greatest leverage of her life. This was not just a divorce, it was a hostile takeover of her own destiny. Final call to action and open ending, and that is where we leave Eleanor Vance. The victory is absolute. She has her empire, her vengeance, and her freedom. But the silence in her penthouse is deeper than ever. Did the acquisition of $1 billion company truly fill the hole left by betrayal? Did the revenge fix what was broken? Or did it just create a new, lonelier kind of prison? The next chapter is hers to write, but it will be a chapter fought on a new battlefield, the human heart. What do you think? Was Eleanor's plan a stroke of genius or a cold masterpiece of vengeance? Did the victory bring her happiness? Let us know in the comments below. What was the single most powerful move Eleanor made? If you love epic comeback stories, brilliant strategy, and seeing power shift in the most dramatic way possible, then show your appreciation by hitting the like button. Share this video with anyone who knows that true strength often works in silence. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more stories where the game is played for the highest stakes.